Nick. Let's move on to the second presentation.
Sure.
The presentation is by Hyungrae No from Sunchon National University in South Korea. The title is Interpreting Ordinary Uses of Psychological and Moral Terms in the AI Domain. Nick, are you here? Hyungrae, are you? Oh, hello, I see you. Fantastic. Do you have slides?
Yes. So should I be sharing the screen?
Yeah, if you want to, that would be nice. Share your screen and start the
Good.
present mode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you as well. So thank you for attending the talk, and thank you for the conference organizers. So I'll be presenting a paper that has been recently accepted for publication in Synthesis. So the presentation is part of the full version of the paper, so you will have access to the full version sometime very soon. Okay, let me just begin. Okay, so well, the presentation is about interpreting what ordinary speakers really mean when they use like emotion terms or moral-patiency terms in the AI domain. So, you know, as the picture shows, the first one, the humanoid robot ICUP, some researchers have found that when their participants were presented with the physical presence of ICUP and asking choose between a mentalistic explanation of ICUP's behavior and pure mechanistic explanation of ICUP's behavior, they found that about nearly half of the participants choose to give mentalist explanation. So for questions like, do you agree that ICUP likes this round objects? And they say half of the participants says yes. And similarly, the second one is the robot dinosaur, Pleo. And when researchers showed the participants the Pleos being treated nicely by the human subject and asked whether they think Pleo is happy, and more than half of the participants, majority of the participants said yes. And this is a fictional scene from a movie, but even for fictional robots, when participants were given descriptions of fictional robots, like robots being tortured by human mad scientists, and asked whether they feel pity for the robot, and participants said yes. So the question is, does the referential shift from the human domain to the AI domain retain the original semantics of the term? In other words, what I'm trying to ask in the presentation is, do the ordinary speakers express the concepts, literal concepts in the AI domain as the terms are used when they are used in the human domain? So is there a semantic change or not? So what I'm trying to argue for is to give a non-literal, plausible non-literal interpretation of this sort of ordinary use. So in the full paper, I discussed 3 different approaches, but because of the time limit in the presentation, I'll be discussing just one of the 3 views, namely the emotion view. Shortly, it says in the AI domain, ordinary speakers fail to deliver the literal meaning because the terms in fact express the speaker's emotional responses. So let's go details of the emotion view. So what I'm trying to do by presenting this non-literal interpretation is to criticize the philosophical significance of the analysis of the ordinary language use. So what I'm trying to do here is pretty much very similar to the Mueller-Liar illusion, which you probably are very familiar with. So despite the fact that both arrows have the same length, we misperceive that the that the lower one is longer than the upper one, right? So when I ascribe the belief that the lower arrow is longer than the upper arrow, my belief ascription to myself is essentially mediated by the misperception. Without the misperception, I would not ascribe the belief to myself. What I'm trying to claim here is that a similar kind of dependence relation is found in the AI domain. That is to say, according to the emotion view, in the AI domain, ascriptions of emotions, moral patiency are essentially mediated by affective empathy. And by affective empathy, I mean emotional sharing. Like if you see someone have a facial expression of happiness, you feel happiness. That's affective empathy. On the other hand, in the human domain, such affective does not play an essential role. So what we can draw an implication from this emotion view is that when ordinary speakers agree with sentences like ICAP is happy, what they really mean is, I feel happy to see ICAP's human-like gesture. The problem is the ordinary speaker's affective feeling of happiness has no bearing on ICAP's emotional status or moral status. So what this indicates is that in the AI domain, this sort of ordinary use results from fallacious verbal reasoning. So let's go in more about this. Let me first discuss emotion ascriptions and then move on to the moral patiency ascription. So what I'm trying to find here is the correlation between, a strong correlation between emotion ascriptions and affective empathy. And I found a surprising similarity between Hyungrae and Zimmer's solution and the use of emotion terms in the AI domain. I presume that many of you are familiar with Hyungrae and Zimmer solution, which goes like this. As you can see, geometric shapes are moving. The small circle, small triangle, big triangle, they're moving. And participants interpret this geometric shaped movement as enacting social plots with emotional content. For instance, when you ask a participant, describe the movement of the circle, they would say that the circle is afraid of the big triangle, something like that. So recent study shows that this sort of interpretation, emotional interpretation, are linked to affective empathy, which can hypothesize that participants would not ascribe emotional content without feeling affective empathy. And interestingly, in case of the human domain, according to Hyungrae et al., children's theory of mind capacities, like reading other people's emotions, are not moderated by affective empathy. So it's like you do not really have to feel their feelings, share their feelings in order to ascribe emotional states to other people. From this study results, what we can draw is that when participants agree with sentences like the circle wants to run away from the triangle, the term wants here fail to express the literal meaning because the desire ascription merely expresses the speaker's feeling of fear, and not because these geometric shapes are prima facie non-emotional being, not because of that, but because the speaker's feelings of affective empathetic feelings have no bearing on the emotional status of this geometric shapes movement. So the question is, can we find this sort of strong correlation between emotion ascriptions and affective empathy in the AI domain? And several studies suggest that it is the case. So let's first look into Rosenthal, Vondel, Putnell's experiment, which they conducted experiments by using this robot dinosaur Clio. They first presented this normal video to a group of participants, which is like the human subject touches this robot dinosaur, and the robot dinosaur reacts as if it feels happiness. And in another video, torture video, participants were presented with video like this, like, the human participants is choking a robot dinosaur and it reacts as if it feel pain. Surprisingly, the study results shows that there's a strong correlation exists between the ascription of emotions and affective empathy. Well, which means that the tendency to ascribe pain correlated more strongly with the tendency to feel negatively, and the tendency to ascribe happiness correlated more strongly with the tendencies to feel positively. So this sort of strong correlation can be found in different studies as well. So there are two different studies, Wang and Krumhuber and Shins. They used fictional robots, description of fictional robots. One scenario is about a economic robot, which is described as financially helping others, like helping customers comparing prices of merchandises in a supermarket. And in another group, they were presented with a social robot, which is described as a caregiver, like taking care of elder people like that. And each robots were described as being tortured by a mad scientist by, given electromagnetic shock. So they react as if they feel pain. An interesting research result has been found. So in the social robot group, the tendency to ascribe emotional experience was significantly higher than the economic robot group. And the degree to which participants felt psychological disturbance when their robots were harmed was significantly higher than the economic robot group, which indicates that a lack of emotional sharing, a lack of affective empathy leads to a lack of ascription of emotion, which indicates that in order to ascribe emotions to AI robots, we need to share their feelings. We need to have this affective empathetic feelings. Okay, then let's move on to the ascription of moral-patiency. So here, I found a surprising similarity between an old study conducted by Slater et al., which they replicated the Stanley Milgram obedience experiments by using this virtual female character. The study result is that when participants were presented with this virtual female character being electric shocked, tortured, despite the fact that participants knew that neither the virtual female character is real or the stimulation, the shock given to the virtual character was real, they reacted on physiological, psychological, and behavioral level as if the character and the shock is real. So there's no physiological, psychological, behavioral difference between the actual Stanley Milgram obedience experiments, participants of the actual experiment, and these participants. So what does this mean? Well, this means, suppose that I give a question like, is it morally wrong to kill a living person with a hammer? Ordinary speakers will say yes, because they believe that the action is unjustifiable. However, when you give the same question about robots, like, is it morally wrong to destroy a robot situated in social context with a hammer? Ordinary speakers will say yes, but not because they believe that action is unjustifiable, because they feel the same amount of negative, affective, empathetic feelings for both the living person and the robot. And there are studies that shows that this is the case. Well, I go back to Rosenthal, Blondel, Putnell's experiment, same experiment design. And in the harming condition led participants to feel more moral disturbance significantly higher than the donor video group, and the harming condition led participants to be significantly more physiologically aroused, which was measured by I think whether their hands get sweat or something like that. And the harming condition led participants to feel significantly more negative, which means there is a strong correlation exists between the ascription of moral-patiency and affective empathy. And Wang and Krumhuber's and Shin's experimental results also suggest this strong correlation. Same experimental design, and in the social robot group, the social value of the social robot afforded it rights as a moral patient, and the degree to which participants felt psychological disturbance when their robots were harmed was significantly higher. In other words, in the economic robot group, they did not really ascribe moral patiency to economic robot, neither they felt affective empathetic feelings towards this robot. So we can see that a lack of emotional sharing leads to a lack of ascription of moral patiency. Then how about the human domain? Well, do we treat humans as moral patients only when we effectively empathize with them? Not really. According to Dessity and Powell, there are studies provide evidence linking empathy concern, which is to care about others people's well-being, to morality. However, studies have not consistently shown a relationship between effective empathy and moral judgments. And Loninger et al. Study confirmed this hypothesis because they found that children's moral judgments were unaffected by effective empathy, which means ordinary speakers consider other human beings as moral patients, even without sharing their feelings. Now, let's sum up. So the conclusion is ordinary speakers fail to express concepts similar to those typically expressed when emotion, moral patience terms are used in the human domain. For the premises, I didn't really explain this in the presentation, but in the full version of a paper, I explained that ordinary speakers intend to express the literal concepts when using the terms in the AI domain. And ordinary speakers' use of the terms is essentially mediated by their unaffective empathetic feelings towards AI robots. And ordinary speakers' use of the terms in the human domain is not moderated by effective empathy. So what does it have to do with philosophy? What does it have to do with philosophy of mind or moral philosophy? Well, because it concerns the determination of proper referential extensions of the terms. Extensions of concepts can change. As we all know, the proper referential extension of marriage has been expanded from being constrained to the opposite-sex couples, but it has been expanded to include same-sex couples. So maybe the term like psychological terms, emotion terms, moral terms, intuitively, although those terms do not really include artifacts, but maybe its extension could be changed to include those things. And some philosophers, namely this philosophers who adopts the relational approach to human-robot relations, argues that we should refer to the ordinary language use in order to determine what the proper referential extension of these terms are. So, for instance, Donaher claims that behavior evidence is the most reliable way to infer the presence of sentience in AI systems, and Kokelberg similarly claims that ordinary speakers' linguistic practices capture cutting-edge shifts in the moral status of AI systems. However, my research shows otherwise. My research shows that ordinary speakers' apparent consideration of AI systems as emotional entities or moral patients, as a matter of fact, results from fallacious verbal reasoning. And we cannot really draw philosophical implication from fallacious verbal reasoning. So ordinary language use does not really determine proper extensions of terms like we should not, terms like emotion terms and moral patiency terms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your fascinating presentation. I'm really looking forward to read the paper because it touches on quite a number of crucial factors, crucial aspects that have been playing quite a role in the discussion of AI status. And I mean, I'm sure you are all aware of this. So we have two questions already. Rachel, do you want to go first? And then
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much for the talk. I really enjoyed it. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about any implications of what you said for the proper use or relation to AI. So I was thinking about things like social robots, as you mentioned, or robot companions or relationships with AI. Does the difference mean that there's some sort of deception going on and it's not appropriate for people to talk about having a proper relationship or use them in such settings?
Mm-hmm. Thanks. A very good question. Well, in the full version of the paper, I didn't really discuss some sort of normative implications of my talk. I mean, of my discussion, because I really wanted to strictly focus on whether semantics change when ordinary speakers use those terms in the AI domain. But well, I did discuss this in a footnote, mentioning that there are philosophers who believe that this sort of misuses can have more implication that we should not treat AI systems as moral beings or emotional entities, because our emotional responses to those systems cannot be the proper ground of treating them as sentience or moral things with moral status. Well, I think that's pretty much where I should agree with. I mean, as philosophers, it's our kind of professional duty to suggest a proper path for determining the very extension of concepts, and we have obligation to see whether we are using the terms in a proper way or in an erroneous way. And according to my research, since emotional responses are the case of generating errors, so I think we have very good evidence that we should not treat AI robots as moral patients or emotional beings. But one thing very interesting, however, is that I did not present this in the presentation, but in the full version of the paper, I discussed that, in fact, ordinary speakers use agency terms literally, like robots decide to do something, robots believe something. Surprisingly, there's no semantic difference between the agency terms used in the AI domain and the human domain. So the question is, how do we fill the gap? The emotion terms and moral terms, errors, okay, but how about the agency terms? There's no semantic difference. Well, that's the kind of thing I should work on more. But yes, for the time being, I should say that well, we should not treat AI robots as emotional beings and more patients. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Dan, you're next.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. I agree with pretty much everything you're saying, although I don't know if you're intending on throwing out all of these survey methods as a way to gain something useful. The way I see it, a lot of the surveys about the consciousness of robots and those kinds of things, the way they ask the questions is a huge part of the problem. And I know it's like trying to capture ordinary language, but do we really want to capture ordinary language, or do we want to capture ordinary belief, what most people really believe? Because that's what it seems to be more important to me. And so instead of asking, does iCub like round objects, then you say, do you think it's possible for iCub to like round objects? And that question works better for the torture, the pain. Is the robot really suffering pain at the moment? And then you can ask as a separate question, is what's happening to the robot bad for it? And then why, the kind of an open-ended question. And then I think a lot of the results will change quite a lot, not necessarily all of them, but and with intention and things, it's going to be complicated as well. But so were you intending to throw it all out, or what was your view?
Well, that's a tough question. Hard to answer, because I was just trying to criticize some ordinary language philosophers who follow this Wittgensteinian lines that, ordinary language determines the very meaning of concepts or very meaning of terms. But should we dispose this data from the observation of ordinary speakers or lay intuitions? Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think this connects to my previous answer to my previous question. Like, we should carefully analyze the underlying reasoning process of ordinary language use or lay intuitions, if you put it that way, and to see whether they are using language or thinking in a proper way. And if not, then that could be a very good source of data to draw some sort of normative implication that, you know, we are all wrong. We are just, the way in which we treat AI robots as sentient beings is exactly the same way that we treat geographic, you know, shapes as emotional beings. And that's hilarious. And, you know, unless we have more better grounds to ascribe sentience to AI robots, we should stop doing that. So that could be a one way of using the data. Did I answer your question? Thanks.
May I ask a question too? I mean, what do you think is the role of the framing of robots, AI technology in the media by companies when it comes to, you know, companions, sex robots? I don't know. And an example is also in the study you presented with a dinosaur, and you presented one of these cases was called the torture case, in the sense of the dinosaur that is being damaged is being tortured. I mean, that's also a kind of concept that's being extended. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on this idea of framing, and that's, I mean, that's a broader issue that we're talking about, in my view.
So if I just to clarify, are you asking what do I think of the company's way of manipulating people's emotions by using this kind of robots with high capacity of reactions? Is that the question?
I mean, maybe part of it. It's more like the way robots are presented to us in various contexts. And I mean, we are normally not familiar with robots in our daily lives. At least I haven't met a robot in my daily life. So I know this from research, from companies, from whatever types of context. But even in research, people use concepts like torturing a robot, for example. And I mean, this is a type of framing that kind of sets up the stage. Let's put it that way for emotional, for affective empathy, for feelings, however you want to call this. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on this.
That's a good question. Well, a similar question has been raised by my former supervisor. I'm not sure whether you know the name, Carrie Victor, who studies about the scientist way of using psychological terms with respect to like bacteria or neurons or the brain. Has the same meaning or expresses the same concepts as the psychological terms are used with respect to human beings or animals as a whole. She says yes, because there are some scientific way of, well, putting more precisely, she uses this mathematical modeling in order to argue for the ontological grounds of semantics of psychological terms. Well, in my case, the problem is, what I'm thinking is there's no scientific way of determining the ontological ground of semantics with respect to the psychological terms when they are used with respect to artificial intelligence systems, because these are very new things and they do not share the kind of same cognitive models that we humans have or other animals have. So now we are moving into new territory. So it's a very tricky question and difficult question, but what I'm thinking is we are in the very, very first process of expanding the very proper extension of these terms to whether to include AI robots or not. And we do not really have the solid theoretical ground to determine whether AI robots are proper subjects as to be treated as sentient beings or emotional moral beings. So I do not really have a determinative answer, and I do not really have determinative answer whether scientists or psychologists or social scientists are using these terms in right ways. I mean, because we do not really know. And what I can tell you from the study that I did was that at least ordinary speakers are wrong. They are making errors, but I think it's us philosophers' role to show them the right path. I mean, should we include them or not? I mean, yeah, that's our job to do.
Yeah,
sorry, but I
lot.
do not really have a determined answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, neither have I asked the question. Edward typed in the chat, what about symbols and myths to express ideas that ordinary language cannot explain, such as in Plato and poetry? Edward, do you want to unmute yourself to extend on this?
Yes. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. No, I think ordinary language philosophy is very limited because, as proven and demonstrated by Plato and later the Neoplatonists, symbols and myths are used deliberately, purposely, in Plato at least, because ordinary language cannot explain certain phenomena that go beyond ordinary experience and ordinary language. For example, the myth of the allegory of the cave. Plato uses that deliberately because that particular notion cannot be expressed in ordinary language as effectively as in a myth. Poetry especially as well. In poetry, you have symbolism used deliberately to extend the ordinary language way of talking. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, thanks for the question, but I'm not
unless of course you don't consider Plato to be a philosopher.
Oh, that's obviously not. I do think that Plato is a philosopher, but I do not really have any knowledge in ancient philosophy, and neither I do not really know much about symbols and myths. But I do agree that ordinary language philosophy or analyzing ordinary language is the one way to do philosophy, and I do agree that it has on its limitations.
Thank you.
And well, I think that's pretty much what I can say because, yeah, sorry, but I do not really have much knowledge in that area. Yeah, sorry about that.
Not a problem. No, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hyungrae, for your great presentation. Thank you for the interesting questions.